Welcome to the I'm Book podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and this is the YouTube version of our podcast. To get the audio version, you can hop on over to Spotify or anywhere that you consume audio podcasts. We are going to jump into some really cool content, so stay tuned for our next guest. We look forward to connecting with you, and be sure to subscribe. And to start your author adventure, hop on over to o'learypublishing.com, where you can map out the entire process and see what writing a book would look like for you. Let's get started. Perfect. Welcome back to the I'm Booked podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and I'm here today with Sandra Elia. She and I met a few weekends ago at the Beyond Words Book Festival in South Beach, Miami. And she's from Canada. She and I both spoke at the conference and had tables there. She and I connected. She's got a beautiful book called Never Enough: 3 Pillars of Food Addiction Recovery. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I wish I was still in sunny Florida right now.
Yeah, so we were just talking right before this recording. She's in Canada, and she said there's frost on the ground, and I had to close my windows in my office because I could hear some landscapers outside. So we have different environments going right now, but I'm so glad that you took the time to be here and stop by the show. And we love to talk about books and how people write books and publish books and market their books and all of that. And, you know, this book has a beautiful front cover. I know your publisher, Tabitha Rose from Like to Paper Publishing. She's amazing. She's the reason we got together as part of this Beyond Words Book Festival. But tell us a little bit about your background and how you started in the world of food addiction and food addiction recovery, and what that looks like for you.
For sure. It's so interesting because I actually spent most of my career in the corporate world, and I worked for a consulting firm, and it was a wonderful, rewarding career, and I loved it, but it was never soul satisfying. And I always had that inner voice, that inner wisdom going, girl, you don't belong here. You need to be doing something else. You need to be having a bigger contribution in the world. And I would squash that voice with my thinking, right? So the intuitive voice, that inner wisdom, it holds such great guidance. But then my thinking would be like, are you crazy? You've got benefits, you got 6 weeks vacation, retirement, like you're nuts. Like no one leaves this job. And then I had a baby. And then I had a baby 12 years ago, my beautiful Sophia. She's my proof that dreams do come true, because I had always wanted a girl, and I had her at 38, which is a little late in life to be having babies. And I knew then I really couldn't go back to the corporate world because I was going to be a single mom. And so I thought, what's next for me? And it started with this idea of becoming a coach. I loved the idea of working one-on-one with people, inspiring people, helping them live their best lives. And so I went back and became a certified coach. And a friend of mine, a really close soul sister, said to me, oh, are you going to help food addicts? And I was like, are you crazy? I'm not helping food addicts. That's way too hard. Even though by this point, I'm a recovered food addict. I had lost about 100 pounds. I just thought I had nothing to give people. That anybody who's struggling with their weight or food addiction, they want somebody who's on the cover of Shape magazine. They want somebody who's a bikini model. That's who they want to live. They're not going to listen to me. Even though I had found peace with food, peace with my body, and ultimately so much peace with the people around me. But I put my toe in the pool. I just said, let me see what happens if I just set foot on this path. And it's so interesting because when you do get onto the right path, the universe often responds with a resounding yes, because the opportunities came, the doors open, partnerships came, alliances with some of the top obesity doctors here in Canada, that all came rushing towards me. So that was validation. Yeah, you need to be on this path. Now, having said that, it's not that it was always easy. There were many nights when I would lay in my bed crying, going, okay, God, I thought you wanted me to do this, but it's like things aren't always flowing, and it isn't always easy, and I haven't always found my people. But success is paved with failure. I often say that. And what differentiates somebody who achieves great things, from people who maybe, give up on their dreams, which always makes me quite sad, is resilience. It's the ability to get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down. Like you fall down 50 times, you get up 50 times. You're the one who's going to make it. We think in our minds, it's the person who never falls down. It's the person who doesn't misstep, the person who doesn't make a mistake. No, that doesn't exist. Not when you want to do great things, and not when you want to write a book. That's for sure.
That's true. That's true. So when you decided to put your toe in the pool, what were you thinking as far as, can I do this? Am I qualified to do this? How did you really get the courage to sort of hang the sign over your door, so to say? Because I think that's the hardest thing, is when the outside world sees us, right? You could say, I've had this success. I've lost 100 pounds. I know that I've done it for myself, right? But the imposter syndrome comes in, like, yeah, but I'm not on the cover of Shape magazine, or I don't have this credential, or I don't have that, or what if I can't answer somebody's difficult question? So what did you do with those feelings?
Yeah.
I'm assuming they came at some point. How did you
Oh, of
overcome
course.
those?
Yeah. And I got thrown in the deep end because um I had did something that was so serendipitous. I, for some reason, had decided to join Obesity Canada Network, which is a network of professionals helping people living with obesity. So these are the top doctors and scientists and psychiatrists and psychotherapists, all the things that I am not. And then 2 weeks later, I get an email because they were opening a Toronto chapter. My timing was impeccable, and somehow I ended up being the vice chair of the Toronto chapter because I had the gumption and maybe the naivety to believe that I could do it, even though no one knew me in the room. So there's a couple of things. I always come from a place of yes, right? So when that email came out saying, come out tonight because we're going to open a Toronto chapter, the answer was yes. When they were looking for people to sit on the board, and I remember I went with a friend who was also interested in getting in this field. And, she's like, you're going to volunteer your time. Like, there's a lot of driving. There's a lot, like, do you even have time for this? You're a single mom. I'm like, yes, I'm going to make the time. I'm going to come from a place of yes. When they had their first event and they wanted a speaker and they asked me to be a speaker, yes, even though the imposter syndrome was like through the roof because I had never spoken to doctors. I don't have a medical degree, but I have my own personal experience. And what I know is that we are more alike than we are different. So you may have your PhD, you may be a surgeon, I may be just a person with lived experience, and now I'm a person who's helped thousands of people today. That wasn't so when I started almost 10 years ago. But we are more alike than we are different. And if I focus my teachings on that, then I can speak from my heart to your heart, because guess what? We all have a heart. We all have our own insecurities. And in my own field of work, we all have our own relationships with food. That is common ground for everyone. So that's how I tried to get over the imposter syndrome. So I knew that I couldn't out-educate them. I couldn't outsmart them. I couldn't out-experience any of them. But what we rarely see at the front of the room is someone being vulnerable, opening up their heart, speaking from their heart. That is hard to reject. And if they do, that's okay. So that was one piece. So knowing that we're more alike than different, and then saying yes to everything. So shortly after I joined this network, I was asked to create a program to come in and do a pilot. I didn't even have a program. And I remember, again, so serendipitous, it was Tuesday. And Tuesday I had to run the program twice in a clinic, in a medical clinic, supervised by a medical doctor. Guess what I was doing on Monday? I was writing the lesson on Monday, presenting it on Tuesday. And it was a huge success. And in fact, that same program runs in clinics across Canada. And when I started working with Tabitha, I knew I wanted to be an author. I knew I wanted to write a book. And again, the universe kept tapping me on the shoulder. People would be like, so tell me about the book you wrote. I hadn't written a book. One time I was even introduced as an author. I was speaking, they said, and Sandra is an author. And I had to correct that person and say, no, I'm not an author. I've never written a book. And it just kept
Wow.
happening. Yeah, and so I just said, you know what, it's time. And when I sat down with Tabitha, I was like, I don't know what this book is about. And she's like, it's about food addiction. And again, I had that visceral, no, it can't be. I don't have anything to add or give value. And then she said, it's your program. It's the program that you've been running at that point for over 6 years. And that's the power of working with somebody who can kind of show you your blind spots.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true, because I think there's this myth that authors go lock themselves in a room by themselves and they open up their computer and they start writing, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Maybe there are some talented individuals who can pull that off, but for the most part, having a team and having someone who can, like you said, see the blind spots, offer some insight, because sometimes we're so into our world and things that we do so regularly seem so familiar and simple, and like, do people really need to know this? Like, doesn't everybody know this by now? Because we've been working with that clay for so long. But no, not everybody knows it. So when you sat down with Tabitha and she said, your book is your program, sweetie, how did you go about getting your program written into a book that could be consumable by somebody who might not have met you or isn't working with you directly or as part of a program?
Yeah. So I'm a really, because I don't have a medical background, when I teach a program, I bring a lot of heart to it. So I am a food addiction counselor, which means I have more liberties than maybe a psychotherapist, in the sense that I always teach in story. So I tell my own story. I don't believe in senseless suffering. My childhood, I had, like many people who struggle with their weight, had childhood trauma and neglect. And I don't believe in senseless suffering. I believe in finding meaning. And for so many authors, especially in the self-help realm, I believe should really look at what they've experienced and try to find meaning that can serve others. And it's so interesting to me now that my book is out in the world, how many people say, you told my story, you're in my mind. So my program was always present the facts, present the science, the theory. And now that I've done all that, let me bring it all to life with a story, with what I experienced, how I overcame, how I looked at it, how I shifted my perception. And because I had ran at this point for 6 years, my program on repeat several times a year, in front of a live studio audience, if you want, but it was really in clinic, I was able to really hone my message. Because when you're in a room with people, you can see which jokes land, which ones don't, which concepts totally confuse people and left them in the weeds, which concepts always hit home. And I just kept refining my message in front of real people, that there wasn't much left to do. When it was time to write the book, the message had been crystallized and tested and hit home for people who live with food addiction. So I know other people might not do it that way or have the opportunity, but for me, that was the winning combo.
Mhm. Well, I think for me anyways, when I get to work with someone who has, they say, if you want what someone has, then do what they do.
Yes.
And so if I see someone has succeeded in an area that I have not, then I want to lock arms with that person,
Yeah.
regardless of what medical degree they have or educational letters they have after their name, because they have the experience of being in a place where I am and now getting themselves to another place that I want to be. And to me, like you said, that's the most inspiring thing, is when somebody can be vulnerable and share with heart. That's the real winning combination. And I know that's true in a lot of the addiction recovery world. It's like they say, the 12-step world, one alcoholic helping another, because
Exactly.
you can understand what that world is like if you've been in it and why someone relapses. It's not because they're stupid or they're morally faulty or anything like that. You can understand what goes on in the mind or how the compulsion works and those kinds of things. So I can imagine in the food addiction world, it's the same way. It's not a perfect path towards a perfect body. Once you decide I admit I have an addiction. And so now it's like, now I'm going to sail into my, successful, sober self or whatever. But it's a very rocky and arduous path that is not necessarily understandable by someone who hasn't gone through it themselves.
Correct. That's 100%.
So how long did it take you from idea to published book? How long were you working on it and writing?
Yeah.
And got it
So
done?
it's so interesting because I started the process because, again, the universe kept tapping me on the shoulder. There was never enough time. And then the pandemic hit and it was early days. And I thought, perfect. You know what? This pandemic will be a couple of months. They'll give me the time to write this book. And no. The pandemic here in Toronto lasted 2.5 years. We had some pretty stringent lockdowns, probably one of the most locked down places in the world. And my book took about 2.5 years. I laugh now to think that it could have been a couple of months. Not the case for me. I also have dyslexia, so writing for me is quite difficult. And I needed the help of a ghost writer. However, people sometimes think, oh, the easy route. No, because remember, I had done my program in clinics now for 5 years. So much of it I needed to rewrite. So it was in my exact words. So much of my teaching is storytelling. So I couldn't have the story. If you've been telling the same story for 5 years and then you put out a book and the story's a little different, wow, you're going to lose so many of my my clients, my fans. So I had to go back and rewrite so much of it. So it was my exact words. And then when it went through the editor would say, oh, no, that's great. You can't say it like that. It's better. I'm like, no, it has to be said like I've been saying it this way for too long. Even if it's grammatically incorrect, it has to stay the way it is. So it's that fine balance of having somebody, because I never written a book. I don't know what the art of a book is. I don't know which way to put it. The developmental edit was phenomenal, right? Something I could never, I don't have that skill set. That's not me. I'm not a developmental editor. So that was fantastic. And it had to be in my voice. It had to be.
Right. Well, writing a book is definitely not for the faint of heart.
No.
And my jaw is still on the ground that you had locked down for 2.5 years, because I live in Florida, and I don't know if you know what an insane state Florida is in our country.
Yeah.
Lockdown was literally like 2 months.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like 4 out without masks, and our governor, anyways, that's a whole nother story for another. But there was a lot of interesting opinions at the time. Thank goodness we're past us. But, and thank goodness you had the time you needed to get your book done.
Exactly.
So Canada locked down for that long for you.
Yeah, exactly. It was perfect. It nearly drove me mad, but that's okay. It gave me the time. And, a good friend of mine who knows me so well, she's like, it's a good thing you're such an optimist and you think anything is possible. Not to discourage anyone, but if I knew how much work it was going to be, I probably would have made an excuse. Now's not the time. My daughter's too young. Career is budding. No, you have to make the time. There will never be the right time to write a book. Now that it's done and it's out in the world, I tell you, it is my greatest sense of accomplishment and pride. And I'm glad I took the time. And if I can offer a piece of advice for budding authors, 2 things that I did. I had 0 expectations with this book, and it has served me so well. So I expected no one to read it and no one to buy it. And so every time someone buys my book, it is like Christmas morning, because it's like, what? Another person bought it. And then the second thing is when someone reads it and now the messages are coming in and I just get little notes of how I changed their life. Or one doctor, actually, she did it as a book review in her clinic. And then she said it had changed someone's life. So every time I hear a piece of information on how I impacted someone's life, oh, it's even better than when they buy it. But I went in with 0 expectations. And I think that's a great way to go into something because you're less stressed, right? I wrote the book in a way that no one was going to ever read it. And I think it really allows the creativity to pour out of you.
Yeah, it's good advice. And I think especially when the book serves a bigger purpose,
Yeah.
right? So you were already in clinics, you were already speaking in front of people, you had already done your program for 5 years. And so this wasn't something where you were, doing something entirely different. And you came out, it was like coming out of the closet as like, I'm gonna be a food addiction counselor and this is my moment. Like now, believe me, because I wrote the book, it was, I've already done this. And so now I'm gonna share what I've done in a book. So
Yes.
I think that's beautiful. Now, when you got the book out, because I believe books are their own miracles and they have their own way of taking flight in unexpected and unusual ways, that I always say to my authors that if you took a blank piece of paper, like when you had the idea for your book or before it was published and you wrote, in the next 12 months, what do I think, what doors will this open for me? Or what surprising things can I imagine might happen? And then write it all down. And at the end of a year, if you look back, you'll probably laugh at it because all that will have happened and more,
Yeah.
maybe not some of the things, but better, so I think there's always this sort of magic sauce that happens. So for you, when your book came out, and now that you've had it out for a while, what are some of those magical things that have happened for you because your book opened the way?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, if you're going to get a publisher in Florida, because that way you'll have great opportunities to travel. So that has been wonderful and surprising. I've traveled down to Florida twice, last time for the book fair and a time before for my launch. So I did both the launch in Toronto. And a piggy bank. So I sit on the board of Obesity Matters. I'm the chair. And World Obesity Day is March 4th. And so I was able to have a book launch on World Obesity Day. And hopefully other authors can do that, find a day that resonates with their book. And the launch was huge. It was amazing. There was over 100 people. There was dancing, there was talks, there was book signing, there were people that I had worked with. People would come in and say, I met you in Burlington 4 years ago, and this is how you impacted me. So I would think for me, it's just also having all these clients come back to me and find me and come to the book signing. That's been phenomenal. Definitely speaking engagements. So that's my passion. So more than writing is speaking because of dyslexia. I love being in front of a room and having a microphone, and that's happened. I've done some media now across Canada, in Toronto, in Vancouver, and Calgary as a result of it. I think that it's just it's a live resume, it's as opposed to writing the words down. It's saying, no, look, this is what I've accomplished. Here's my heart and soul into this book, and know that it's addictive. Like I'm already thinking, what's the next book?
Oh, I would say we've had multiple authors who have written multiple books because you're right. Once you start and you realize, oh, wait, I have a team of people to help me. I'm not in this alone. I'm helping more people because I think it's multiplying yourself. The book can speak on your behalf in a greater way than your time can allow as a single mother. You can only be so many places at so many times, and you have other responsibilities, but your book can be everywhere at all times, which is
I love
amazing.
that. Yeah.
So for those who are, let's say they're listening now and maybe they think they may have a food addiction or they haven't really considered that. I always like to touch a bit on the topic of the book because I think it's important, the message that you share in your own experience is part of this whole exciting process. What's the first step in things that you would do with your clients or that you would recommend? Of course, they need to buy your book, which is called Never Enough: 3 Pillars of Food Addiction Recovery. But what else can you
Yeah,
suggest?
for sure, for sure. And definitely head on over to my website, sandraelia.com. So super easy to find. I think it's really looking at your relationship with food. And for some of us, I always do the comparison with alcoholism. There's many, many people on this world who can drink a glass of wine or savor the odd cocktail. And then for someone who is living with alcoholism, that is not an option anymore, right? A wine glass could really set them on the path to a downward spiral. It's not going to look very good for them. And it is with the food addict, right? We watch other people enjoy the odd indulgence and it doesn't seem to impact their lives. But for us, it's quite different. That when we have our trigger foods, so a trigger food is something that we obsess about. Once we start, it's hard to have a reasonable portion and will often lead to an overeating episode. These trigger foods generally are chemically engineered foods. They're factory made, they're nutrient poor, they're disease causing, and they're actually more substance than food. So a substance, like a substance abuse disorder. And so if you find that your relationship with food is not peaceful, that your eating and your weight has begun to impact all areas of your life. So it's starting to impact your relationships, your career, your health, your mental well-being. Then we look to see, is it potentially an addiction? And oops, my little doggy doesn't like, obviously. I'm going to see if I can quiet her. Hang on. So then, we look at addiction treatment. And that's what the book is about. So the 3 pillars is the formula. So at the base is a foundation, because we can't just have 3 pillars in sand. So oftentimes that people struggle with their weight or their eating, their foundation was pretty shaky. As I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, there was childhood trauma, neglect, maybe, struggling with your weight or your eating has chipped away at your self-esteem or your self-worth. So the foundation is self-acceptance and self-love. Acceptance of where your body is today, because you're never getting this day back. And love is always energizing. Nothing will slow you down more than self-hatred, harsh internal dialogue, self-condemnation. That will drain you of every ounce of motivation and energy you have. So for me, I spend a lot of time on the foundation of self-love to energize you. Then the house sits on 3 pillars. So we eliminate or reduce our trigger foods, these substances that nobody should be eating, whether you struggle with your weight or not, whether you have food addiction or not. Nobody should be eating ultra processed foods. There are doctors who are finally coming out and saying there's over 200 chronic illnesses. They can all be traced back to sugar ingestion. Sugar is a powerful, terrible drug, but that's another whole podcast. The second pillar is community. You need to be tapped into people who get what you're going through, who are going to celebrate successes with you, that are going to hold you up should you have a setback. And the third pillar is spirituality and mindfulness. So we know addictive eating is often mindless eating. And so one of the antidotes is mindful eating, being present with your food, seeing consuming food as sacred. And then the spirituality, that's just understanding your worth, right? So we're all born perfect little beings. We come into this world with the spark of the divine, with a magnificence, with a calm, confident center, and we lose our connection. We lose our connection because sad things happen to us. People tell us we're not enough. And we forget that there's nothing wrong with us as we are, that we are worthy. And so spirituality in context of this book is just remembering of your worthiness. And at the top of the house is peace with food, peace and sanity with food. So many of us has come from the diet culture. We don't know am I doing keto today? High fat, low fat? Am I counting calories? Am I fasting? What am I doing today? Right? Peace. Just having a peaceful relationship with food, no longer looking to food to alter our state. So we're not looking for food to numb out, to comfort, to love, but having food return to its rightful purpose, which was to nourish our bodies. So that's in a nutshell. So yeah, definitely head on over to my website for more information.
I love it. It's beautiful. And you said it so well and so succinctly. It's clear that you've taught us for so many years now that you've boiled it down to like the element of like how to do it. Actually executing that in your life is probably a whole nother story for sure. But to get to Sandra, it is sandraelia.com.
You got it.
Gary. So I'll put that in the show notes. I'll put a link to the book. And I really appreciate your time today. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited we got the chance to meet in Miami. And Tabitha brought us together. Thank you, Tabitha, if you hear this.
Yes.
I really think that you're such a gift to the world. What you're doing, who you're helping, how you're showing up in such vulnerable ways is very admirable. And I wish you all the best with your book and your success in helping all of the people you've already helped, the thousands, and I'm sure thousands more to come. So
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me to be on.
this was lovely. And for more about Sandra, hop on over to her website at sandraelia.com, where you can find out more about her programs, get her book, and connect with her in any way that might help you have a better, healthier, happier life. Thank you again for being part of the podcast, and we will check with you back on our next episode.
Wonderful.
So this has been another episode of the iBook podcast. I'm April O'Leary signing off. Be sure to hop on over to o'learypublishing.com to start your author adventure and see what writing a book could do for you in your profession, in your career, and what doors it might open. We thank our guests for being a part of the show today, and be sure to subscribe to podcasts here on YouTube. We look forward to serving you and helping you get your book out into the world.